These are a series of short films designed to illustrate Scotland's readiness for independence. These films seek to demonstrate this by an examination of the political, economic, social and cultural case for stepping out into the world as its newest nation. We will seek to bring the independence debate around to its fundamentals, and will look at the potential risks and benefits of both yes and no votes. But we believe across the board that the arguments for yes are stronger. It is often remarked by those on the yes side, pithily and perhaps unfairly, that the case for no can be distilled down to Scotland being too wee, too poor and too stupid for independence. These films will seek to flip this on its head and show how Scotland is in fact big enough, rich enough, smart enough and above all, ready to be independent. Indeed, more than that Scotland needs to be independent. Common arguments against independence are that, due to Scotland's small size, we would be more susceptible to the often fierce headwinds of the global economy, that we would lose the international clout we have as part of the UK, and that we would become poorer by no longer enjoying the benefits, like the pooling and sharing of risk and resources, that come with being part of the world's 7th largest economy. Let's examine each of these one by one. Is it a fact that smaller countries are inherently more vulnerable? We can look at the twin examples, so often cited as reasons to stay in the UK, of Ireland and Iceland.
The Royal Bank was almost the same size as the whole of the UK at that time, meant I could do something about it, whereas my Irish counterpart and my Icelandic counterpart, remember the Ark of Prosperity, they weren't so lucky because they weren't big enough.
Now, just over 4 years ago, the tiny island Republic of Iceland experienced the worst economic collapse of any European country.
And the economy of another European nation, Ireland. Good times turned sour during the worldwide financial crisis.
Both countries were infamous victims of the banking crash, with Iceland enduring a swift and complete collapse of its financial institutions, while Ireland was forced into a colossal bailout of its banks. First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, has since been ridiculed for remarks made before the crash that both countries were part of what he called an Ark of Prosperity. Yet, for all Alistair Darling likes to leap on them as examples of small countries that went bust, in terms of prosperity, at no point even in their darkest hours did either Ireland or Iceland fall below the UK in terms of GDP per capita, the measure of a country's wealth per head of population. Between 2008 and the present, Ireland's lowest GDP per capita recorded was $44,600, Iceland's was $51,500, while the highest GDP per capita the UK has achieved since 2008 is $39,600. Similarly, their annual rates of GDP growth are better than the UK's, with Iceland currently at 3.7% growth, Ireland at 2.6%, and the UK down at 2.2%. It is probably true that small countries can be more vulnerable to sudden economic change, but they also seem able to adapt and recover quicker, while often retaining greater prosperity than us in the UK. In a report for the Harvard School of Government, research fellow Adam Price used the metaphor of small nations as a flotilla of small boats that often get tossed around during turbulent economic times but remain difficult to sink, and which, when the good times return, can prove quicker and more adept at charting a new economic course than the supertankers, countries like the UK. On to the issue of the UK's international clout, otherwise known as how the UK punches above its weight. Many of us on the yes side have wondered why we need to punch anyone at all. Why did we get involved in 2 Middle Eastern wars, both unwinnable and one illegal, which have increased the risk of terrorism on our shores? Why are we the 3rd biggest arms dealer in the world, after the US and France, supplying weapons and military aid to regimes that use what they buy from us to oppress and kill their own people? What other reason beyond prestige do we still need nuclear weapons for, given even the US and NATO have said they would rather we got rid of Trident in order to redirect resources to our conventional armed forces? It's often not Scotland who get represented when the UK uses its international voice. When signing up to the EU's Common Fisheries Policy 30 years ago, the UK sold much of the fishing rights to Scottish waters, which represent 20% of Europe's fisheries catch, to other countries like Italy and Spain, doing untold damage to the Scottish industry. In the EU, we are seen as a region with only 6 MEPs, the same number as Malta and Luxembourg, while countries like Ireland and Finland, which are the same size or smaller than us, have more than double our amount of MEPs. Not only does the UK ignore us in Europe when our interests and theirs don't coincide, it also underrepresents us. Lastly, many prominent politicians like Gordon Brown have talked about the economic security born out of being part of a larger country, as it means we can pool and share risk and resources. In principle, this is the sharing of wealth between the richer and poorer parts of the UK. Yet Scotland has never historically benefited from this arrangement. Government expenditure and Revenue Scotland figures show that over the past 5 years, Scotland has subsidised the UK, nearly always paying a higher percentage in tax than it received in spending. Furthermore, it was admitted in 1997 by UK Minister William Waldegrave that from 1979, Scotland had subsidised the UK by £27 billion. That's £4,500 for every Scot. The reality is that for every one of the last 34 years bar one, Scotland has made a positive contribution to the UK exchequer. We are not one of the poorer, but one of the richer regions of the UK, normally outranked only by the southeast of England and London. Despite the fact that for nearly every year over the last 3 decades, Scotland has contributed a larger percentage share of tax than it has received in spending, Gordon Brown and other prominent figures in Scottish Labour have talked about further fiscal equalisation across the UK. Were such plans to be put into effect after a no vote, it would mean Scotland keeping even less of the revenues raised here than it does currently. An independent Scotland wouldn't be the biggest country in the world, but we certainly wouldn't be the smallest. The evidence suggests Scotland would be able to weather economic storms, would be better represented internationally, and would in fact be better off leaving the UK. Just how small is Scotland anyway? We constitute a third of Britain's landmass. 2/3 of the world's countries have populations of under 15 million, making us very much normal. And smaller countries tend to develop and prosper quicker due to their more local and dynamic governments and more effective policy making. Scotland is clearly big enough to be a successful independent country. In fact, it may be close to the perfect size.